back to the Pharmaverse Podcast. I'm your host, Michael Pietrack. And if you're a leader or an aspiring leader in the pharmaceutical industry, well, then you are in the right place because we interview the brightest stars from all the corners of the pharma universe. The show is powered by K. Bassman International, the leader in pharma and biotech recruiting. We're also sponsored by Executive Biotech Advisors, a trusted consulting resource in the biotech industry. Today, we're joined by Heather Paprstein. She's the Senior Director of Oncology Medical Affairs at Corcept Therapeutics. And today, we're going to be discussing how to lead with empathy, what practical steps you can take as a leader to help your people grow, and the future of medical affairs. I can't wait for you to meet her. Heather Paprstein, welcome to the Pharmaverse.
Hey, Michael, thanks for having me. Excited to be here.
And I'm going to get a disclaimer out of the way. We got to make sure the lawyers are happy. You know, clearly your comments are your own opinions, not necessarily the opinions of Corcept.
Absolutely. Thanks.
But there's so much I want to talk to you about because you're an oncology nurse, a devoted mother, a medical affairs leader. And we're going to talk about all that. But before that, take me back to like your childhood. Who was the most influential person on your leadership style and what did you learn from them?
Yeah, I think there's going to be two people that I'd like to talk about. So number one is my mom. My mom is also a nurse. She's been a nurse for a very long time, and she was a professor. And so I was honestly raised between her and this just core group of really strong nursing leaders who were developing that next generation of nursing leaders. And it was just really influential to see their practices because they were all in different areas of nursing and to really take that to heart. And I just knew from being a little kid that I wanted to be a nurse. And so I think I had those role models in my life of just these strong women giving their advice and how they lived their life and their practice. I think the second person, though, who really influenced my leadership style is honestly my husband. Now, he's in a completely different field. He's in IT, but he's been a manager, a team leader for a long, long time. And so when I originally became a leader in nursing and a leader in medical affairs, I honestly would go to him because I feel like there's a lot of leadership things that are across all different areas, right? You can be a strong leader in different areas and take those things into heart. And so I would run things by him and be like, hey, how would you approach this situation? You know, does it matter if I do this? And so I just think you need to surround yourself with people who give you honest feedback. He's someone who will always be like, nope, you should have done this, or hey, did you think about that? Or maybe next time think about this. And so I think as leaders, you just need really honest people in your life, as well as those people who are more like cheerleaders and coaches as well.
Yeah, that's true. And if you would have given me a guess on the most influential person in your life, I would have guessed mom, just based like how maternal you are and the whole thing. And so do you remember when you decided you were going to be a nurse? Because when I talk to my kids, like one says, well, I'm going to do what you do. And the other kid's like, no way, that's so boring. So do you remember that time when it happened for you?
Yeah, it was probably really, really early, like elementary school. Like I couldn't see myself necessarily helping people, but I would bring home like the bird with the broken arm, or like if my little brother got hurt, I would try to patch him up for mom and, put the Band-Aid on him and things like that. So it was very, very young. But I know, for some people it happens really early. It was probably about that time where my brother said, I'm definitely not going to be a nurse. So I think everybody, like you said, has that reaction of, I'm definitely going to do this. My daughter wanted to be a rock star in kindergarten. And then starting in first grade, she wanted to be a veterinarian. And now she's applying to vet schools. So I think, sometimes people change their mind, but some people know right away. But to be honest, I think taking it into being an MSL, I don't think anybody grows up saying, I want to be an MSL. Nobody knows what we do. And, you really learn that through your career when you interact with MSLs and meet them for the first time. So I'm hoping that we can eventually, with all of us, having kids and being like, my kids can say, oh, I know what a medical science liaison does. And they sort of pair it when I talk about it. Maybe someday there'll be a kid out there who says, I want to grow up to be an MSL, right?
Well, my oldest daughter says that's what she wants to be because she watches the podcast. She knows what we do. And I'm like, you have to go to pharmacy school or maybe, some other scientific area. And she's like, I don't know if I love science, but so we'll see. Well, to be determined on that one. But speaking of school, so tell us the story about that time where you stepped away from industry to work as a school nurse. I love this story.
Yeah, and I think it's just a time where I really knew that I had to make some changes in my life. I was in pharma, had been in pharma for a while. I had really lost the mentors. They had moved on to another company, so I was kind of left without like a really strong mentor. I also didn't necessarily agree with how that company was doing the medical science liaisoning, if I can make that into a verb. And I said, you know what, this is a time where my oldest son's a senior in high school. There's a job opening for the high school nurse. And I thought to myself, you know what, I'm just going to take a step back, use my nursing license, practice as a nurse. And I honestly believe that sometimes you're just called to a place at a certain time. And there are definite people that I took care of at that high school that I know that I made an impact. I had a teacher who had a heart arrhythmia, and thank God we were right next to a hospital. So I took them over to the hospital. I had another student who would have seizures, and I had another student who unfortunately really had a hard time with cystic fibrosis. And so I really grew and kind of just gained that energy of being able to care for someone. I needed to do that for a while again, right? And then I did get a call after about a year and a half of doing that to go back and join a medical science liaison team. And I thought, sure, I'll do this. And then that person who was one of my all-time mentors said to me, she said, how did walking away from medical affairs make you a better MSL? And it kind of struck me off because I guess I hadn't recognized yet that I was a better MSL for doing that. And I thought about it and I said to her, I really have decided this is what I want to do. And now I'm 100% committed to being an MSL, to leading MSL teams. I know how I want MSL. I know where I'll draw the line. I know where I'll push a boundary. And I think, being able to grow in that confidence, grow in that ability to decide this is how I want to be a leader, this is how I want to be an MSL, made me a better MSL. Because before I was kind of like, okay, someone gave me direction, I'm going to do it. I was always like I'm going to excel and do these things that people ask me. But it taught me that I could question and be like, what if we do it this way? Or, you know what, this is really a best practice. I think we all should be doing it like this. And so I don't regret it for 1 minute, just walking away and taking that time. And if there's anybody who's listening, I think people are scared to do that, right? You're scared to make a big change. You're scared to do something different. And sometimes you make a bad choice, but that's okay. You recover. But sometimes it's a really great choice and you don't know that until later. And so I always encourage people to take breaks, try something different. Life is short and you don't want to get at the end of it and be like, man, I wish I would have, right?
Yeah, it looks like you gained a lot of perspective from that. What about leadership lessons? Did you take any leadership lessons away from that time as the school nurse?
Yeah. I think when you're in an emergency situation, and you're outside of a hospital system, you don't recognize that you are the only person who may really know how to handle this. When you're in a hospital, you can call people and be like, you do this, and they know exactly what you want them to do. You're running a code, you're going to push meds, you're going to do the recording, you're going to do compressions. But when you're at the school, you're like, man, I have to get a lot of people on the same page right away and make sure they know how to do things. So there's a lot of things you can do to prepare people. But at the same time, you really learn how to rely on yourself, rely on your own, nursing skills, intuition. There was a kid who came to me who hurt his arm. And I'm like, I really think this is broken, called the parents. And the parents were like, yeah, well, we'll see about taking him in. And I said, no, I really think this is broken. Please, please, please take him in. And then I called later that day to check on them. And they said, oh yeah, thank goodness you said to take him in. It's broken. He's actually just got out of surgery. So he needed a surgical repair. And so I just think, you have those instances that teach you to listen to yourself, take charge, and really push for the thing that needs to be done.
Yeah, I could see that would really be a nice leadership lesson, to trust that voice inside you, the intuition, and push ahead. And, if someone were to ask me about your leadership style, because I know you pretty well, I would have an adjective to describe your leadership style, but I want to hear how you would describe your leadership style in one word.
One word. Now, you know me, Michael. One word. I can never do one word, but I will give you one word and then a backup word. I really try to do transformative leadership. I also really feel that I'm a servant leader. And so, my goal is to always, help people and be a support person. We actually, at one of my companies, did this test, how people will do strength finders and other type of informative about your personality. We did a fun little test called What Immune Cell Am I? And so people would get, I'm a natural killer cell, I'm a dendritic cell. Nobody was surprised when I got that I'm a T helper cell. And so I think that kind of fits my leadership style. But, really just that transformative. I want to challenge people. I want to push people. I want people to lead themselves, whether it's in their day-to-day role or when they're on a project or a process. I want to encourage them to just be really empowered to step up. I tell my people that I'm interviewing for MSL positions, I want people to be the boss of their territory. You know where you need to go. You know who you need to talk to. I really want people to not have to necessarily check in every time, but also know that when they do check in, I'm 100% going to support them and hopefully have an answer for them.
What about someone that's like needs some direction, like needs you to, give them the nudge into the right direction? How do you handle that situation?
Yeah, I think the first thing I like to do is to kind of question them to see if there's a gap in terms of their knowledge. Like, do they know they have a need? Or am I someone who's sitting back and being like, oh, they have a need? Because I think you're always in a bad situation where you're like, man, you need this. And people are like, I don't need that. And so I think the first thing to do is to have the conversation and be like, how do you feel about this? How do you think it's going? Are there some different things that you can consider? So I think, you have to look at a specific situation and help them get to the point of like, man, I do maybe have some gaps here. And then I think it's a very individual, like, what do they need? There's so many different societies and groups out there that have training programs, certifications. I think depending on what that gap is, there's a lot of outside materials. You don't always have to be the person yourself to give them what they need. And then do you schedule more time together? I also really like a lead by doing. And so I really try to show people how I would do something. So I never ask my team to do something that I wouldn't do myself. So I support ad boards. I do KOL meetings. I do all of those things and then invite them along to say, let me model this behavior for you, or let me model how I would do it.
That's really great. The word I would have used for you is empathetic. Like, you're just such an empath. If I ever tell you, like, I'm going through something, it's like you almost feel it. I'm sure you use a lot of empathy in your leadership style. Can you speak about that a little bit?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you for saying that. It really, warms my heart, obviously, to have you feel that way. But I think the thing that I try to remember as a leader too, we're all people. We're putting our pants on the same way. We have families, and I tell my MSLs this all the time. Maybe not everybody has a spouse or a kid, but you have somebody in your life that matters to you. You have a pet. Sometimes I think our pets are more trouble than our people. And so, we all have these things in our life that are going on. And, I don't necessarily know everybody's story or what their current health is. And so I really try to put myself in people's shoes and say, help me understand maybe why this didn't happen, or help me understand why we need to make this decision. But you don't have to share with me your personal information. But people tend to open up to me, and they tend to tell me anyway. And I remember one MSL told me one time, she needed some time off. She just said, look, I need time away. I can't do this. And I'm like, that's fine. I'm going to step in. I'm going to do this. We've got you. No problem. Come back when you're ready. And then it was probably about maybe 6 months later. She goes, I just want to tell you, like, now I'm going to tell you what I went through. And I obviously am not going to share that. But at the time, I wasn't sure if I was ready to share. And you were just so supportive. You made me feel like it was okay to step away to get what I need to do. And she was, only off for a few days. It wasn't like she was gone a long time. But later, when, 6 months later, when she told me, she goes, it was just really, I'm really glad you didn't push me at that time to be like, why is this going on? And that you really were supportive. And then when I came back, you were just like, things are as they are. Like, you didn't push me to be like, well, what happened? And so I think sometimes just having that ability to be able to read people and, sense that there's a time to ask questions, but there's a time to just quietly support people.
Yeah, I really think one of the main attributes leaders have is they get people, they can connect with people. And I know that you have that. There's a question I want to ask you, and no offense to any of this, but I'm seeing more and more executive leaders that are nurses, but historically it's been so D-degree heavy. But what advice would you give to other nurses who want to grow their careers, move into senior leadership as you have in medical affairs?
Yeah, and I think it even starts back a little bit further. I think it's harder just for people without D degrees to get that first role. So I think, we need to talk more about how we get them that first role, and then how can they progress up to get that leadership role, right? And so my advice to people who don't have a D degree is look and see what else is available in the pharma world. Can you work in medical information? Can you work in scientific communications? Can you be some other type of supportive role? And then take opportunities to show that you could actually perform in this role if it opens up again for you. And so I think, for me, it was really getting those first clinical nurse educator roles where I was able to step in, show my clinical acumen, show that I understood how pharma operates. And then if I wouldn't have done those, I wouldn't have been able to get into medical affairs for sure. I actually spent a short time in commercial too. And I always remind my commercial colleagues, I'm like, I sold for a while. I doubled my territory. I mean, I understand features and benefits. And so I think for you to be a good leader, to understand the other functions in pharma is really important too, to understand how you work together. So I would just really give people, if you're trying to move up in leadership and you don't have a D degree, I've made that decision about 3 different times in my career. Should I go back? And I've asked myself and really thought about it, priced it out, looked at time. And, I kept saying, should I go back? And it just, for me, it wasn't the return on investment. I wasn't going to invest that time away from my family, that money away from my family. I felt that I had already spent the time in pharma. I had the skills, and I would be okay that maybe at some of the big places, I was never going to be the VP of medical affairs because they're only going to take a D degree. And I was okay with that, because if that was their only reason for not offering me the role, I don't know if that's a place I want to be. I want people to make decisions based on who they see in front of them, not a piece of paper that they spend a few more years getting, right? And so to push ahead for leadership, to get back to your original question, right, is you have to be flexible, you have to be scrappy, take on projects that maybe nobody wants and really just kill it. And people be like, man, nobody wanted that because it looked like it was fraught with problems. And you really turn that ship around. Be that person who volunteers to lead, because a lot of people are like, oh, I can join, I can review, but people are like, I don't have the time to lead. So just find the time, take on those leadership positions. If there's any training at your company, I see stuff all the time at companies I've been at, we're going to have this next cohort of training come through. Take all that free stuff that you can for sure, because you never know when you're going to be sitting next to the other person on a different function and they remember you from that class to be like, man, they really contributed a lot. So, do that all within the confines of still being able to kill it at your day job, to be home for your family, right? All of that. So there's always got to be balance, because people recognize that too. They recognize that, man, they have priorities. They really, stick to, I have a plan for my life. This is how I want to be. You're principled, right? And I think that's what gets you up the leadership, is when you just stick to your principles, stick to your plan, and show that you can really execute.
Good advice. Great nuggets there. Another curiosity here. So over the last few years, we had COVID, totally changed the MSL job, virtual meetings, now we have the influx of AI changing how MSLs are doing their job on a daily basis. What other long-term issues are facing field medical teams and medical affairs in general?
Yeah, and I think the thing is, and I think we've seen this too, there's always going to be the push to have, how can you use your medical affairs team in a commercial organization, right? And so I think we're going to see more of that, because medical science liaisons really are the scientific, the medical experts. And I think we're going to potentially lose people to the commercial side because they can maybe make money. I think we could also potentially, still have a push from some companies that they may see, how much can we push medical affairs to help our commercial team to get that product sold, especially when things are competitive. I'm lucky enough to be at a place that doesn't do that, but I also, can recognize from other companies that I think the medical science liaisons are getting squeezed a little bit to be like, how can we move these objectives? So I think keeping activity planning and keeping your goals and objectives separate are really important. I also think too, you talk about COVID, and I think there are still some places that aren't open. And so access is still a little bit of an issue, getting those MSLs in. I had an MSL reach out to a thought leader, and they have never met them before. And they said, oh, well, if we're going to have a conversation, we have to get a contract in place. And I was like a contract, pay them? I said, this is just an introductory visit. I don't even know if they have stuff that we would want to pay them for. Yeah, their reputation precedes them, but we're not going to put a contract in for an introductory visit. Once you guys meet and you have a conversation and they have ideas, well, absolutely, pay them for their time. But, I do start to wonder too, a lot of people really, want to make sure that their time is precious too, right? If you're talking about HCPs or seeing a lot of patients, they have pressure on them too. And, if they have to monetize that time, then that's what they have to do. But I also think too, we just have to be really cautious about how we do medical affairs and make sure that we're really meeting people for the right reasons and not just paying people to have their time with us. So I think really good MSLs can get some of those insights, without paying. And then if we're actually going to move forward with what that person is doing, then it's absolutely appropriate to put them under contract and, consult with them.
Interesting stuff. Yeah, that could be a big challenge down the road. During COVID, when I really got a grasp of the size and scope of COVID and how people were reacting with virtual meetings and stuff, my big fear was, oh my gosh, MSL teams, the 12 to 20 person MSL team is going to be like 5 people. I thought team sizing would just shrink, and it hasn't. It has a little bit. But what do you see for team sizing long term?
Yeah, I think, I've been really lucky to be at places that use like a real full field force analytic program. And so, that's been very common in sales. They're going to look at script numbers, they're going to look at people, how many people they would get out there. It's a little bit harder to do for medical affairs because some of the things we do maybe aren't as tangible, as easy to count. And I think if you have a team that listens to you and say, hey, we do want them to see and have so many interactions, but we also want them to have time protected for travel. We want time protected to prepare for ad boards. We want them to be able to have time, new journal articles come out all the time. And so you really need to work with your field force sizing team to be like, give everything here a value and a number, and be like, if we want to see this many people, have this many ad boards, if we want to work on this many ISTs, if we want to support this many company trials, all of that stuff takes time. We can't just be sitting, like you and I are now, and do like 8 back-to-back, 1 hour KOL meetings, right? Where's the time that we have to put in to write up what we did, to plan for those next calls, to follow up on the requests from the people that made them during, those videos? And so I think when you can really have a good, honest conversation about how much time all of this takes, you can put it in a mathematical formula and you can figure out. We just did a field force sizing exercise, and I was surprised. They actually said, you need more people than you think you do. And I was like, oh no, I guess I do when I really look into this. And I'm usually, pretty good about that. But so it's really nice to put some math behind it, put some science behind it, and have people really understand that, it's not just having this quick conversation with a KOL. There's so much that goes into planning. There's so much that goes into taking care of the requests that are made afterward. And sometimes just making the appointment takes me, 6 emails or, because like, hey, what day are you free? How about this? So you're spending a lot of time just even making that appointment. And that all has to be baked into deciding how many people you need to do. And I think you have to look too at like therapeutic area, right? If I'm going to stick in one therapeutic area and, I'm not in lung, so let's say lung, there's a lot of people who treat lung cancer. If I'm in a different area, right, or I'm in some rare sarcoma, maybe there's not as many people who treat that. And so when you're in a thing like oncology, like I am, I look at, how many different disease states are we in? What disease states are we considering? If you have to call in all these different specialists, you need more people. You can't just say, oh, while they're there, they can talk to the lung and the breast and the GI. I'm like at a large institution, now you've just named like 20 different people. Like they're going to have to be there all week to talk to all those people. And so I'm not going to be able to get them to the next state because they're stuck seeing all of those people. So I just am being really smart about like who sees the people, the patients that you hopefully, want to help, and, really make a decision about what's important to my MSL team. Where do I want them spending their time? And then you can look and see how many people do I need to get that done really well.
That's a relief because, as a guy that places field medical people and medical affairs people, I don't want them to shrink. So, right. Thanks for reassuring me. But, a lot of our viewers are people that are either in their first leadership role or they're trying to find some best practice to take their leadership practice to the next level. What are some things that you've done with your team, a real practical thing that's really worked and paid off?
Yeah, I think I always look at my team and say, most of the things I do, if not all the things I do, one of them can do. I can find someone on my team who can step in and probably do this. And I really take that opportunity to not keep all of those opportunities to myself and say, hey, can I put someone from my team on this team? Or can I have them shadow me while I do this? But, when you're looking at, building out these tools, you need to do that if you're going to be a leader. And so you may not get that opportunity sooner, rather than later to like, how do I do this in a safe place where I have someone who has my back who can tell me how to do it? So I think of all the different, analytic processes we've put into place for insight. When you build insight tools, I always try to put someone on my team on that, even if they're maybe not ready to be that final decision maker, They know that I'm on there and can be that final decision maker. But I'm like, what do you think about this? How should it look? How should we design it? What's the stuff that should go in? And I do that with my hiring. I always have an MSL be a part of the hiring process. If they want to be a people leader, you need to learn how to like scan a CV, see if you like how they look on paper, meet them in person. Do you like how they presented themselves? How do you get them prepared for that presentation in-house? So really teach them, like, if you're going to be leading a team and you're going to be interviewing, how do you do that? And then as year-end reviews are coming up, I'm working with some people to be like, what if you were giving me my year-end review? If you want to be a people leader, you need to know how to do end of year review. One, it's great feedback for me because then I learn where I can improve or what I'm doing right and they want to see more of. But, talk to me about that. And so I just think that you can really empower people when you show them, like, I believe in you. I know you can do this. And I also make sure it matches their interests, right? I think that's the most important thing with growth and development. You have those conversations early on. Where do you want to be in 3 years? Where do you want to be in 10 years? Where, are you going to be in medical affairs forever? Or do you want to transition to clinical development, clinical operations? Do you want to be a people leader? Do you just want to be the best MSL you ever can and be a great MSL mentor? And then I think, they set goals towards those things that they want to be. And then you can involve them in the process. And I think that's what helps people go from like that early leadership. I think finding a mentor is really important. It could be me. It could be somebody else. I've met people and then, if I'm thinking about something, I'll ping them and be like, hey, what would you do in this situation? Or, hey, do you have this? How do you do this there? And so I think, people hopefully view me as a mentor and, they reach out to me. And then I have people that I reach out to and just say, I'd love to run something by you. Does this make sense? Because sometimes things we do is very regulatory driven, right? We're in pharma and there's an easy answer. You have to do it this way. But then there's sometimes I feel like it's more like the nuance, like secret sauce. Like, could we approach it this way? Could we do it different? And maybe you need that legal conversation, but I love people that'll have that like mentoring conversation with you to be like, yeah, let's talk through this. Like, I love the fact that you're trying to be thinking outside of the box or being really thoughtful and want to make a good decision.
Great advice there. I really appreciate that. I'm going to implement some of that myself. I really like the point about bringing someone along, like, hey, just help me with this, or let me show you how to do this. And I think the employee really feels like, oh my gosh, I'm growing as a result of that. I think that's a great best practice.
And you give them a voice too, right? Because usually it's a tool that they're going to use. And I'm like, no one is going to be a better person on this team than the end user. Like, we have to put the end user in first because you're the one who's going to be living and breathing this. Do you want to check that extra box? Do you want to put in free text here? Like, help me understand how this will be useful to everybody. And I think anytime you can work with an end user of a process is really, really important.
So I try to ask every one of our guests this same question because, again, a lot of our viewers are in their first leadership role. And they're making all the rookie leadership mistakes that we all made along the way. So what is some advice that you would give to someone who's in their first leadership role to avoid some of those early pitfalls that we've all stepped in?
Yeah, I think, you have to be flexible, you have to be scrappy, but you also need to make sure that you understand what you want to do. And so I think for me, the times where I've gotten my hand slapped, whether it was early in the career, maybe a little later, I like to be able to push things a little bit. I may have come in a little hot, like, hey, I can help you do this. We should do it this way. And I think what I've learned in my leadership style is to ask more questions. I'm a talker, but I'm trying to listen more. I need to really understand where people are at. And so I think the way to not make mistakes is to ask the questions, listen to the answers, and then make a decision, make sure you have all the information available to make that decision about, do you want to come in hot about something? Because I think that's the time where we get our hands slapped or we maybe make a mistake is just because we get so enthusiastic. We get, we want to fix a problem, right? And we think, gosh, I've got the answer. And maybe we just haven't been around long enough to understand it's got to be done this way, or, hey, we could do that. But, really we need to get this person on board first. And so I think when you're just a little bit more thoughtful and ask those few extra questions to be like, why do we do that this way? Okay. And then be like, okay, I hear where you're coming from. I've done it this way. Could we consider it? And then I think people have felt heard as opposed to maybe just attacked and been like, oh, your idea is wrong. We got to change this right away. And so that would probably be the best advice I would give myself back in the past, or, tell people in those early leadership roles, like, keep your eyes open, keep your ears open, listen, ask questions. And, and sometimes there's just a hill you got to die on, and that's okay. I'll stand on that hill all day and just be like, it's not a matter of being a right or wrong. I just think that this approach could work. And I think when you take right or wrong out of it sometimes, I think that helps as well, because nobody wants to be wrong. Everybody wants to be right. And so I think, when you frame things up in that sense that, this could be more successful, or this would encourage more participation, or whatever it is, I think when you frame things like that, it helps.
So true. When you come in hot, that's when you go in guns a-blazing, where you cut before you measure. It's better to measure twice, cut once, kind of an idea. So I have a similar question for you. Let's imagine someone doesn't have a manager like you that's bringing people along, showing them how to do things, but they want to become a people leader. What can they do to position themselves? Any advice there?
Yeah, a couple of things. So I think there are a lot of outside organizations. There are medical affairs professional societies that you can look at and see if you can find yourself a mentor, get some good advice. But I think also too, leaders are people who bring forward good ideas. And so if you're not able to bring it up in your own medical affairs organization, and you do get to work in other departments, it does help to have other people kind of see you as a leader, right? When you're on those projects, when you're in those things, you just take responsibilities. And then ultimately, if your manager is not leading you in the way that you want to be led, it's a tough conversation, but I think you need to have it. I think you need to go to them. If you're not having regular one-on-ones, tell them, hey, I would like regular one-on-ones. I want to grow and learn from you. And I think people can appreciate that. Be like, man, I really do need to step up. Like, this person's under me and I have stuff that I can offer them. Let's have those conversations. And then if you're not being, managed the way that works for you, have that open and honest conversation, and just, a lot of I statements, right? Like, I can benefit more when I hear these things, or I appreciate that you point out, the things that I need to improve upon. I don't know how to find the resources to improve those things. Can you help me find the resources to improve those things? Or I would like to be given more opportunities. Is there an opportunity coming up in this area that you know of, or could you please think of me? Because sometimes I do forget, oh yeah, somebody does have an interest in that. So I love when my team reminds me, man, the next time that comes up, I would love to be considered. And I was like, for one thing, I was like, oh my gosh, I didn't even know. So I'm so glad that you said that. We are going to have more opportunities. And then as a manager, you do need to keep that in mind. You need to remember that, right? When they do share those things with you. So I just think, ultimately, if you're in a terrible place, there are plenty of MSL positions that are open. Maybe you do need to be in a different place if you can get out of where you're at, because I do think you need to be at a place where you can grow and flourish, and not just have your immediate manager support you, but that person's manager support you, and things like that. So, I'm lucky to be working at a place where all the line levels support my team, and that's what you want to get. That's the dream, right? You don't want to just have your immediate manager support you, but you want the other people to know and help you grow and invite you to be on projects.
Well, I know you've built an incredible culture there at Corcept. And so these bits of advice are really good, really practical. And I speak for everyone that's been listening that we thank you for your insights, your words of wisdom. We've all benefited from them. And thanks for being on the Pharmaverse.
Thanks. Happy to do it.
Well, that concludes another episode of the Pharmaverse. We have many more great leaders lined up for you, so make sure to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss a single career-enhancing insight. As for this episode, that's a wrap. See you next time on the Pharmaverse. Thanks for joining us on the Pharmaverse Podcast. Make sure you subscribe below so you don't miss any leadership insights. Like and comment. I would love to hear from you. We'll see you on the next episode of Pharmaverse.